Hi everyone, and welcome to Core Lecture 27. Today we'll discuss exploring the logics of argument. Before we begin, you'll need the following materials for today's lecture assignment. You'll need a document to write on, as well as access to your Project 4 draft materials. The purpose and goals for today's lecture are as follows. We'll understand logic as a means for content organization. We'll define terms that frame current understandings of logic, and we'll explore audience considerations regarding the use of logic in academic writing. Defining logics. So oftentimes when we hear the word logic, we hear it used more in a singular sense, as if it is one thing. However, there are different approaches to logic. There are different ways that we can structure our argument that reflect different types of logical thinking. So I wanted to include the S there to indicate that, again, different cultures, different audiences abide by different logics, and it is up to you as the writer to be aware of that and to incorporate that logical structure into your argument and allow it to guide the organization of your content. I love this definition of what logic is from the Purdue OWL. They note that logic is a formal system of analysis that helps writers invent, demonstrate, and prove arguments. It works by testing propositions against one another to determine their accuracy. When we think of logic, especially as it unfolds in an argument, we can think of it as a way to help organize your content and guide readers from one point to the next. So when we think about it, I always go back to Spock. I grew up on Star Trek, so I always go back to Spock and, thinking, oh, it's highly logical. So meaning that you've said one thing and you've said another thing, and this is the conclusion that you're reaching. So it's kind of like, okay, A plus B equals C, 1 plus 1 equals 2. And so it's saying, oh, okay, you've said this, and then you said that, and now this is the conclusion you reach. Okay, makes sense. But like I said, there is no one definitive approach to logic. As we are about to explore, there are different ways that we can provide our rationale or our reasoning for supporting an argument and how we ultimately reach our conclusions, which oftentimes function as the overall argument of our work. To best explore the different approaches to logic that we can use, especially in academic writing, we will look at inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. When we think about the term inductive reasoning, it indicates a type of argument that moves from specific data points to a larger generalizable conclusion. By using inductive reasoning, it helps you emphasize and helps your readers understand what the data means, especially in relation to your argument. So if we look at this example, our first data set, under half of the students attended history class the day before spring break. Data set 2. Under half of the students attended math class the day before spring break. Data set 3. Under half of the students attended biology class the day before spring break. So we've got those three very specific data sets that represent different individual instances in which students did not attend class the day before spring break. But we are identifying a pattern that would allow us to develop a specific conclusion. So in, let's say the classes I'm taking, let's say I'm taking history, math, and biology, right? So if I'm noticing that in those three classes that I'm taking that not even half the students are attending, maybe a logical conclusion I could reach for that would be professors should just cancel class the day before spring break because not even half of the students regularly attend. So Of course, we could reach different conclusions based off of what our argument is. So maybe we could reach the conclusion to say, so professors should make the day before spring break, should make attendance mandatory. Or perhaps cancel class entirely, or they should make it extra credit, or whatever the case may be as it relates to our argument. But the point is that we're saying example one, example two, example three out of observations that we've made. So here's a conclusion that my readers can draw from the different data sets I've just discussed. Let's turn now to deductive reasoning, and it's sort of the opposite of inductive. So that's the use of two statements with a logical connection, or we could look at it as rules, and those are used to draw a conclusion. So this allows readers to arrive at the conclusion on their own due to the greater certainty in the establishment of relationships or rules of the provided statement. So if we really quickly go back to inductive reasoning, we saw how we can draw a number of conclusions. So yes, the data sets demonstrate some kind of pattern, and that pattern is students do not attend class the day before spring break, so that Friday before. But as you saw, we can reach a number of different conclusions about what that data can mean. Can either mean, hey, professors should just cancel class, or no, professors should make students attend class, or even no, student or professors should offer students extra credit for attending. So you can see how there isn't a lot of certainty in inductive reasoning. And so you as the writer, if you're using inductive reasoning as your logical guide for your argument, you have to be very clear and explicit to what that conclusion is. Because if you do not state it and if you do not support it, then you can see how your audience can reach perhaps a number of conclusions based off of how they understand and interpret the data. Maybe you're a person that says, no, students should have to be in class every single day. And so you might reach the conclusion of, well, then that day should be mandatory. But let's say another person finds, well, no, if students are not getting the content, then what good is the professor lecturing? So they should just cancel class. So it really does depend on who is reading your work and the conclusions they reach based on your data sets if you don't clearly define that. Now let's go back to deductive reasoning. There is a greater certainty in deductive reasoning, and so oftentimes conclusions are more subtle. And you as the writer don't have to explicitly state it. So let's look at a quick example. Statement 1, Dixie State students wear school colors on game days to support student athletes. Statement 2, today nearly all Dixie State students are wearing school colors. Conclusion, there must be a game today. So we have said that, okay, based off of more general observations, Dixie State students happen to wear school colors on game days to support student athletes. And perhaps as we're walking around campus, let's say we're on the encampment mall or near the diagonal, and we can say, wow, a lot of our peers are wearing school colors. So that must mean that there is a game today. So we can see how that conclusion has a bit more certainty to it than perhaps the one that we looked at with inductive reasoning. Now, that's not to say that deductive reasoning is airtight. I could pose a counterclaim or a counter argument that says, well, maybe there's another event going on. Maybe they're all wearing school colors to support the most recent theater production. Maybe they're wearing school colors completely by coincidence and everyone just showed up in their DSU gear. So deductive reason isn't necessarily, again, airtight, but again, it gives you as the writer sort of the ability to be a bit more subtle in your conclusions, as it's likely that your reader will reach the same conclusions that you want them to. Now that we've defined inductive and deductive reasoning, and we can see that there are a couple different ways that we can quite logically approach and support an argument, we want to consider additional concepts and additional things that might weigh on our decision of, okay, well, what kind of reasoning do I use in my own writing? First, you want to consider what kind of logic your audience values. As we've discussed in previous lectures regarding audience and regarding organization especially, um, the best way that we can determine that is by looking at previously published works in the field or discipline that we are conducting research in. So if you are conducting research in the field of biology, are you noticing they're using more inductive or deductive reasoning? And that might give you indication on which one would be more appropriate for your argument if you are writing on a biology-centered topic. You also want to critically examine the evidence and warrants you use to support your conclusions. So, you want to think about, okay, well, this is the evidence that I'm using. So, um, obviously, with deductive reasoning, there is a close connection among the different types of evidence and support. There's this kind of, again, this more clear connection between the two. So that might indicate to us, hey, maybe deductive reasoning would be more appropriate here. Whereas if we are incorporating sources or evidence that might seem random or might not immediately give off the impression that they're connected, inductive reasoning might be a better option. And of course, regardless of what type of reasoning you use and what type of logic you decide to utilize, you want to be aware of and account for possible counter arguments that could arise. So in the previous examples, you saw me pick apart each one of the conclusions. So again, it shows that neither approach is completely impenetrable or airtight. Of course, people can pick apart arguments, and so you do want to be aware of that. So again, for example, if you list all of these data sets from students not showing up the Friday before spring break, I could reach a very different conclusion and pose that as a counter argument. Same thing when we looked at deductive reasoning with, hey, students usually wear school colors on the days that there are games to support student athletes. I see a lot of students wearing school colors today, so there must be a game. Again, that might seem like a 1 + 1 = 2 type argument, but I could also make a counter argument that says, well, maybe it's just a complete coincidence, or maybe there isn't a game today and they are using it, their students are wearing school colors to support something else that's going on campus or a different student organization or student group. So you do want to be aware of those and account for them in your research and in your writing. Here's what I'd like you to do for the lecture assignment. Think critically about Project 4, the civic engagement argument. I want you to compose a brief write-up, so about 50 words, that discusses the following or addresses the following questions. What kind of reasoning do you currently employ in your draft? Do you see yourself using inductive or deductive reasoning? I then want you to assess if you find that kind of logic appropriate given your argument and audience. So, is the relationship among your evidence, is it kind of go without saying, is the connection between the two fairly clear to where deductive reasoning would be appropriate, or is the data seemingly unrelated and you need an inductive approach to effectively make the argument or make the case you want to? And then I want you to be honest and I want you to reflect, why do you or do you not find this approach best? So rationalize the type of reasoning that you use as it relates to your argument and to your intended audience. For the weekly homework then, remember to include your Core Lecture 27 summary and assignment in your Week 14 homework submission. Overall, your Week 14 homework submission should include the summaries and lecture assignments from Core Lectures 26 and 27, as well as the summary and lecture assignment from the mini lecture of your choosing. This is all due to Canvas by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, April 14th. If you have any questions or would like to discuss any of these concepts further, please don't hesitate to contact me via Canvas DM. All right, everyone, until next time.